Have you seen the new student?
She didn't look up. That was the thing that started everything. Not the gasps, not the whispers, not the 32 faces that turned toward the classroom door the moment he walked through it. All of that happened exactly the way it was supposed to happen. The room tilted, the way rooms tilt when something undeniably beautiful enters them without warning. Girls grabbed each other's arms. Someone actually dropped their pencil. The teacher stopped mid-sentence and smiled the patient smile of a person who has decided not to fight the weather. But one girl, sitting by the window with afternoon light falling across her notebook at exactly the angle she needed, kept drawing. Her name was Olivia Preston. And the boy standing at the front of the room, half Korean, half American, the new transfer student who had just become the most interesting thing to happen at Lumen International Academy in 3 years, noticed her for the first and most important reason. She was the only person in the room who hadn't noticed him. His name was Theo Kang. And this is where the story begins, not with the boy who walked in, but with the girl who didn't look up. Before we go any further, if this story already has you, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications, because what happens between these two is going to take you somewhere you didn't see coming. Stay with me, let's go. Lumen International Academy sat on a hill in Seoul, like it had been placed there intentionally to be impressive. Tall glass windows, wide hallways that caught the light at angles that made even ordinary days look cinematic. A reputation for producing graduates who went somewhere in the world and stayed there, who returned for reunions in expensive cars and donated to the alumni fund without being asked. It was the kind of school that appeared in brochures and in the aspirations of parents who wanted their children to become the version of themselves they hadn't managed to become. It was also, and no one in those brochures would have said this out loud, a place where your social coordinates were established in roughly the first 3 days and then treated as permanent, not by any official policy, just by the specific and merciless arithmetic of adolescence concentrated inside one building. Looks mattered. Fashion mattered. Who you knew and who knew you and how many people had saved your photo to their phone. These things mattered enormously and openly in a way that most adults would deny and most students would confirm without hesitation. Olivia Preston had known exactly where she stood in all of that from the first week she arrived 3 years ago. Not at the bottom, she wasn't bullied, wasn't invisible in the way that meant people looked through her like she wasn't a physical object in their path. She was simply outside the orbit. She had assessed the social geometry of the place within the first month, and had made a quiet, deliberate peace with her position on its map, comfortable with the outside. She had built a life there, in the quiet margins, with her sketchbook and her earphones and the particular freedom of someone who had stopped waiting for permission to be exactly who she was. She was 17. She had warm brown skin, natural hair that she wore loose most days in the way that said this is simply how it grows and I have decided that is sufficient. Eyes that absorbed everything without immediately giving an opinion about it. The eyes of someone who watches first and speaks second and has discovered that this order produces better results than the alternative. She drew the way some people breathe, constantly, automatically, as if stopping would require more effort than continuing. Her sketchbook went everywhere. It sat on her desk during classes where the subject was too slow for her brain. It rested on her lap on the bus. It was open on her bedside table at night because ideas arrived without scheduling themselves. She drew the light on water. She drew the way the school looked from the back stairs at 6 in the morning when nobody was there yet and the building was just a building, without the performance of being a place. She drew faces she found interesting, which usually meant faces that were doing something they didn't realize they were doing. A woman on the bus reading something that was making her sad. A man at the corner stall laughing at something he'd told himself. Faces in the middle of being honest. Those were the faces worth drawing. She did not draw the new boy at the front of the classroom, even though the room had essentially stopped functioning around her. She was aware of him the way you are aware of weather. Something had changed in the air, something was happening, she was not currently interested in it. Her pencil kept moving. Theo Kang stood at the front and scanned the room with the practiced ease of someone who had been the new student before and understood the ceremony. He had transferred schools 4 times in his life. He knew the script. He bowed slightly when the teacher introduced him. Polite, precise, the correct depth for the context. His voice, when he said "nice to meet you all," was gentle and low and carried without effort. The voice of someone who had learned at some point that projection is its own kind of performance and had stopped performing. He had the kind of face that photographs wanted to find, High bone structure, warm coloring, a quality of restfulness in his expression that made you want to keep looking to figure out what it was made of. The room gave him everything it had. Smiles, waves. A girl in the second row adjusted her hair with the specific casualness of someone who wants it to look like they haven't adjusted their hair. Folded notes traveled between desks in a matter of seconds. His new acquaintances, Sam, who was perpetually cheerful in the uncomplicated way of someone who genuinely enjoys people, Yuki, who had a sharp tongue she deployed selectively and with precision, and Hana, who was quieter than both of them and watched everything with calm, dark eyes, shifted in their seats to make visible room at their table, which was an invitation he received and acknowledged with a small nod. His eyes moved across all of it politely, taking none of it in. These were the moments that Theo had learned to move through with the smooth efficiency of someone doing something for the 100th time, acknowledging the attention, accepting none of it, waiting for the room to normalize. He was not unkind about it. He had never been unkind about it. He simply had no particular interest in the performance. And then, at the very end of the sweep, just before he turned to take his seat, his gaze landed on Olivia. She was sketching something. Her pencil was moving in that particular focus way, slightly tilted, wrist rolling in small, deliberate strokes, the rest of her completely still. She didn't glance up, didn't register the new presence in the room. Her world at that moment was entirely the page in front of her. The light from the window was doing something specific to the angle of her head, to the loose cloud of her hair, to the small set of concentration in her shoulders. She looked entirely and completely somewhere else. Theo sat down. He didn't know why he kept thinking about that. He had been in rooms with people who ignored him before. He had been in rooms where being ignored was the desired outcome, where anonymity was the goal. He was not someone who required attention. He had received so much of it in 4 different schools that it had become essentially weather, something that existed in the background and had no particular meaning. What Olivia was doing was not ignoring him in the way of someone who had registered him and decided to withhold. It was something cleaner than that. She simply had not looked. He had not existed in her world for the full duration of his introduction. And something about that, something he couldn't immediately name or classify, stayed with him all the way to his desk. At lunch, the cafeteria became a theater. Girls brought him things, homemade snacks wrapped carefully, lunchboxes still warm, prepared that morning by someone who had been hoping for exactly this occasion. A folded piece of paper with a phone number and a small hand-drawn heart that someone had spent real time on. He smiled at each of them because he was not unkind, because he understood that attention in this quantity was a form of welcome even when it felt like a performance, and because turning any of it away harshly would have been a cruelty he wasn't interested in committing. But his attention kept sliding across the cafeteria, past the noise in the lunchboxes and Sam enthusiastically negotiating the ownership of an abandoned rice dish, toward the far corner of the room, where Olivia sat alone with her sketchbook open, eating without looking at her tray. She was drawing something. Her fork moved to her mouth at intervals without her registering it. The people around her table, which was, notably, empty of anyone else, were simply not part of her current experience. She looked completely at home. That bothered him in a way he couldn't explain yet. Not in a competitive way, not in the way of someone who wants what they can't have, in the way of encountering something that doesn't fit the existing pattern and finding that you can't stop thinking about the edges of it. Later in art class, which he had selected partly because the school's schedule required it and partly because something in him still kept reaching for the image of a girl drawing in morning light, he found her again. She was at a table near the window, pencil moving, one earphone in and one earphone hanging loose the way you wear them when you want to be present in the room but still have a layer between yourself and it. Entirely self-contained, her own system running quietly and completely with no need for external input. He walked over, stood nearby for a moment in case she noticed. She didn't. "Hey," he said softly. She looked up, just looked, without alarm, without the particular lighting up that he had been receiving from every other direction since he walked through the school's front gate. The calm of someone who had been interrupted before and was assessing with complete neutrality whether this interruption required full attention. "You draw really well," he said, because it was the first true thing he could think of, and he had long since stopped offering the untrue things. She looked at the page, back at him. "Thanks." He waited. He knew the rhythm of these moments, the natural beat where someone laughed, or asked him something, or made an opening that was an invitation wearing the costume of a question. He had been reading that rhythm in rooms like this one for years, and he had gotten good at walking through it. She went back to drawing, one word, no follow-up, no angle, no opening. He stood there for one more second, then walked away, because standing there longer would have required him to explain himself. And the honest answer to "what are you doing here" was one he didn't have yet. That night, while his phone filled with new follows from people at Lumen International who had found him within 6 hours of his arrival, while a dozen posts tagged him or discussed him or featured photographs taken in his direction without his awareness, Theo Kang lay on his back in his bedroom with the city of Seoul glowing through the window and thought about a girl who had not been impressed by him. Not as a challenge, he was careful about that. He had met challenges, people who weren't interested in him specifically because other people were, who performed disinterest as its own form of interest. He knew what that looked like. This was not that. Olivia Preston was not performing anything. She had not looked up because she had not looked up. The world he occupied, the world of attention and arrival and 32 faces turning toward a door, was simply not the world she was living in at that moment. He couldn't explain why that felt significant. He only knew that it did. The next morning he arrived early. He told himself it was because he wanted to get settled before class began, and this was partially true. The other part of it he was not ready to examine. The classroom was quiet in the way rooms are quiet before they are asked to do their job for the day. Morning light came through the tall windows in long gold columns, the specific kind of light that arrives before the city is fully awake and belongs, briefly, to anyone patient enough to be up in it. The building hadn't filled yet. Only the particular smell of a school preparing itself, floor wax and something warm from the cafeteria 2 floors down, and the specific quality of quiet that exists only before noise arrives. And there she was, of course she was, sitting at her usual spot by the window, head resting slightly on her left hand, pencil moving in small careful strokes. She had been here longer than he had. She looked like she belonged to this hour, in a way that he was only visiting. He walked over, slower than he needed to. "Morning," he said. She blinked, looked up. Something passed across her face, a small surprise, not unwelcome, just unexpected. The expression of someone who had not calculated this particular variable into the morning. "Oh, morning?" He leaned slightly to look at the page without touching anything. The sketchbook up close had the look of something used and cared for simultaneously, worn at the corners but the pages themselves treated with attention. "What are you drawing?" She tilted the notebook a fraction away from him, not sharply, just instinctively. "Just random things. Can I see?" "No," he smiled. It was the cleanest no he'd received in years. No softening around it, no apology for the absence of softening, no explanation offered to cushion the landing. "Just no," said the way you say a word when you mean it completely and have no interest in walking it back. "Okay, maybe later?" She gave a small shrug that meant neither yes nor no and returned to the page. The bell rang, the hallways flooded, the day began. But he was still thinking about that shrug at noon. Over the next week, Theo established new patterns that confused everyone who thought they had already understood him. He stopped sitting at the most visible table in the cafeteria, the one where Sam and Yuki and Hannah held court with the easy confidence of people who had earned their coordinates through 3 years of investment. He stopped accepting the lunchboxes that appeared with remarkable frequency near his path through the school, politely redirecting them to Sam, who approached free food with the enthusiastic lack of discrimination of a person who had decided that life was short and warm. Rice was always appropriate. He spent breaks in the art room, usually claiming to need help with his technique, which was genuinely poor. He had the eye of someone who understood what he was looking at, and the hands of someone who was still learning how to make what he saw. He usually ended up next to Olivia, who had gradually and visibly reduced the frequency of her sighs. Not eliminated them entirely, but reduced. "You're wasting your time," she told him one afternoon, watching him attempt to shade a sphere and produce something that looked less like a sphere and more like the shadow of a problem. "Your grip is wrong. You're pressing too hard." "Show me," he said. She looked at him with the expression of someone taking a brief inventory of whether this was worth it. Then she reached over and adjusted his fingers on the pencil without ceremony, the way you fix something that is simply incorrect, without making it a moment. "Like that," she said. "Now lighter. You're not trying to break the paper." He tried again. The sphere was marginally less offensive. "That's worse," she said. He laughed. A real one, the kind that arrived without his managing it, that surprised him in the middle of producing it. She looked at him for a second with an expression he couldn't immediately decode, then went back to her own work. but the corner of her mouth had done something small and involuntary, and he saw it, and he filed it away with the carefulness of someone building a collection of things they know are significant without yet knowing why. He was collecting small things. The way she hummed when she was concentrating, a melody he had never heard anywhere before, but which had lodged in his memory after the first time with a persistence he found inexplicable. The way she gathered her sketching pencils by size before she put them away, smallest to largest, every time, with the automatic precision of someone who has done this so many thousands of times it has become reflexive. The way she always sat with her back to the room, which he understood, had started doing himself in the weeks since arriving, because sitting with your back to the room is the only way to be in a room without being entirely of it. The school noticed. They always did in places like this one. Why is he always near her? The whispers started in the hallway and found their way to every surface that whispers can reach, which in a school like Lumen International was every surface. The girls who had waited at his table with carefully prepared lunchboxes began to whisper differently now, not the curious whisper of people encountering something new, but the sharper kind that comes from watching something that contradicts what you believed was true. Olivia heard it. She always heard things because she was quiet enough that people forgot she could. Quietness, she had discovered over years, makes you effectively transparent to most conversations happening in your vicinity. People lower their guard around quiet people. They say things that they would moderate if they remembered they were being heard. One Thursday morning, she opened her locker and 3 sticky notes fell out and drifted to the floor. She bent to pick them up. Read each one. Stay in your lane. He doesn't actually like you. Go back to being invisible. She read them the way you read things that confirm something you already suspected, not with surprise, but with a specific tired recognition of a pattern repeating itself. She folded them in half, then in half again, a neat small square, and dropped them in the recycling bin at the end of the hallway without breaking stride. Her face was composed, her chest was not. There was a difference, and she had spent 3 years learning to maintain it. She sat through first period without drawing anything, her pencil resting across the open sketchbook, which had not happened in 2 years. The blank page sat there, and she let it sit there, and that was its own kind of statement about the morning. Theo noticed at lunch that she was somewhere else entirely, even though her body was present in the chair across from him. He had been occupying that chair, at that table, across from her, for long enough now that its absence would have been a gap he'd notice. "Olivia," he said quietly from that chair. "I'm fine," she said, before he'd asked anything. A preemptive answer, the kind you give when you have already decided what the question will be and would prefer not to have to hear it. "I didn't say you weren't." She looked at him. This was the disconcerting thing about him. He did not perform concern. Most people, when they are worried about someone, perform the worry, shape their face into its expected configuration, ask the question in the expected tone. He simply looked at her steadily, with no performance around it. The look of someone who actually needs to know. He reached into his bag and pulled out a piece of paper, folded into quarters. "Open it when you're alone," he said. She looked at the folded paper, then at him. She took it and put it carefully in the inner pocket of her sketchbook, where things lived that she wasn't ready to display. That evening, at her desk with the lamp making a small warm circle in the otherwise dark apartment, her mother working late, the city doing its own quiet evening things outside the window, she unfolded it. It was a drawing. Not exceptional technically, he had been accurate about his skill level, or rather she had been accurate about it for him, but careful in a way that was its own kind of competence. Careful the way effort is careful, the kind that costs something to produce. It was her face in profile, with the accuracy of someone who had looked at that face many more times than she had registered. Her pencil in hand, the small earphone cord, precisely placed, the way her head rested when she was absorbed, the particular tilt that meant she was somewhere inside the drawing rather than on the surface of it. He had been paying attention to details she hadn't known she had. At the bottom, in handwriting that leaned slightly to the left, the handwriting of someone who was perhaps in more of a hurry than the letters admitted, he had written, "You don't have to talk loud to be heard." Olivia sat at her desk for a long time. The lamp hummed its small warm hum. The city outside was doing what cities do at night, going on unconcerned. She had known for several weeks that this was becoming something. She had been methodically not knowing it, which is its own kind of knowing, the kind that you can sustain only for a limited period before the effort of not knowing becomes more work than simply knowing. This she could not unknow. This was a boy who had come into a room that gave him everything and had walked away from all of it to find a corner where a girl with a sketchbook was drawing things nobody was asking to see. who had sat in the noise and chosen the quiet, again and again, without making a performance of the choice. She folded the paper back along its original creases and put it in the inner pocket of her sketchbook, where she kept things that mattered. Then she sat in the dark for a while, not drawing, just thinking about something she had not yet decided. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do it right now, because this story is going to go somewhere that I know you don't want to miss. Hit that bell too. Okay, let's keep going. The following week brought something worse. Olivia had learned over years how to manage the specific social weather of a school like this one. She understood its seasons. She could read the particular atmospheric quality of a hallway on a day when something was building versus a day when things were simply the normal version of difficult. She had built a system for navigating it, not because she was calculating, but because she was practical, and practice makes practical. She knew how to be present without attracting too much, how to move through the days without collecting damage. It didn't hold on Wednesday. She was at lunch, alone at her usual table at the edge of the cafeteria, sketchbook open to a new page. She had been working on a sketch of the park near her apartment. The way the light fell between the buildings at the end of the afternoon, making the ordinary street look briefly significant. 3 girls approached. She saw them coming and recognized, from their particular formation and the particular quality of their smiles, exactly what kind of moment this was going to be. The girl in front was named Giselle. She was 17 and beautiful in the aggressive way of someone who had decided at some early age that prettiness was the most reliable form of power available to her, and had been treating it accordingly ever since. She had sharp features and straight black hair and the social authority of someone who has never had to wonder whether people are looking at her. "We heard Theo likes your drawings," Giselle said, with the warmth of someone delivering good news that is actually the opposite of good news. "Maybe," Olivia said carefully. The girl to Giselle's right, Rena, Olivia had never established which, smiled in the supporting way of someone whose job is to amplify. "You must have made quite an impression." The word impression carried inside it something that the sentence around it was designed to obscure. "Did you draw him?" Giselle asked, her tone the kind of sweet that functions as an instrument rather than a quality. "I draw a lot of people," Olivia said. She was still sitting. She had not moved to stand, because standing would have been an escalation she hadn't decided to make yet. "Can we see?" And the sentence wasn't finished before the 3rd girl, who had positioned herself slightly behind the other 2, which Olivia now understood was a position calculated to give her unobstructed access to the table's edge, had already picked up the sketchbook. "Hey," Olivia was on her feet. "Give that back." But the sketchbook was already open and moving between 3 sets of hands, and Olivia felt something cold and specific move through her chest that had nothing to do with embarrassment. Not the discomfort of being looked at, which she was accustomed to and had made peace with, but the violation of something private being handled by people who would not know what they were handling and would not care. Cherry blossoms. A pause. The school gate at night. That's kind of beautiful. Another pause. Then a sharper quality in the air. Oh, it's him, sitting by himself in the art room, head slightly bowed, the light from the window catching the side of his face. She had drawn it the way she drew everything, not as a decision, but as a response, because it was there, and it was true, and her hand had moved toward true things the way water finds its level. The laughter that followed was not laughter at something funny. It was the specific kind of laughter that is performed for the benefit of everyone watching. "Give it back," Olivia said again. Her voice was steady. Her hands at her sides were not. A page tore. The sound went through her like something physical, not loud, but wrong, the specific wrongness of something being unmade that had been made with care. Then another. Pages she had worked on for hours. The school gate drawing that had taken 3 evenings to get right. A sketch of the park near her apartment that had finally captured the quality of the light she had been trying to catch for weeks, falling to the cafeteria floor in pieces. The room went quiet in the way it only goes quiet when something real is happening instead of something that merely looks real. And then Theo was at the door. She hadn't heard him arrive. She didn't know how long he had been standing there, but the expression on his face was something she had not seen on him in the weeks since he arrived at Lumen International. Not the warmth, not the quiet humor that lived in the corner of his eyes when she said something unexpected, not even the steadiness, something colder than all of that. The kind of cold that doesn't raise its voice because it has no need to. "What are you doing?" he said. The 3 girls froze. "We were just," Giselle started. "Leave," he said. 2 syllables, as quiet as everything else about him. But the air in the cafeteria changed, and everyone in it felt it. And the 3 girls left without finishing any of the sentences they had started. The door didn't slam behind them. It didn't need to. The cafeteria breathed again slowly. People turned back to their trays with the particular studied casualness of people who have been watching something and have decided to pretend they weren't. The ordinary noise of a lunch period restarted around them. Theo walked to where the torn pages had fallen. He knelt on the cafeteria floor, in his school uniform on the floor, and began to gather them carefully, holding the pieces together as if proximity were enough to restore them. It wasn't, but the gesture of it was. Olivia watched him. She was still standing. She was very carefully not letting her face do what it wanted to do, which was complicated because what it wanted to do was several things simultaneously, and not all of them were quiet. "They hate me now," she said. It came out quieter than she intended, which was its own information. He looked up at her from where he was kneeling. His expression was level in the way of someone who is sitting with what you've said rather than dismissing it. "They don't hate you, Olivia." She blinked. "Then what do you call it?" He was quiet for a moment, not the pause of someone searching for a diplomatic answer, the pause of someone choosing the honest one. "They hate the truth." She frowned. "What truth?" "That you're the only real person in this place." Silence. Not the dramatic kind. The other kind, the kind that arrives when something true has been said out loud, and both people in the room are inside it, and neither of them is moving, and neither of them is ready to be the one who moves first. Olivia's eyes filled. She had cried before. She was not someone who never cried. She had cried over drawings that didn't come out the way she saw them, cried over phone calls with her grandmother in Lagos, cried once over a book that ended badly in a way she hadn't seen coming. But she had not cried here, in this building, in front of anyone who existed inside the specific social world of Lumen International Academy. She had built a careful architecture around that particular vulnerability, maintained it for 3 years, and it had held. This she had not chosen. One tear, then another. She pressed the back of her hand to her eyes quickly, but he had already seen it, and he did not look away from it or pretend it wasn't happening. He simply held it, the knowledge that she was crying, with the same steadiness he brought to everything. Like it didn't need managing, like she didn't need to apologize for it or make it smaller. She wasn't crying because she was weak. She was crying because someone had said out loud in a room that could hear it, the thing she had been carrying alone for 3 years. The weight of being suddenly, unexpectedly known, after a long time of moving through a place while being fundamentally unseen, was more than her composure was built to hold all at once. Theo stood with the torn pages in his hands and held them out to her without mentioning the tears, without making a moment of either giving them back or not mentioning what he'd seen. She took them. Their hands were close, not touching. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was almost normal. "Don't thank me," he said. "Just don't let them convince you that you're what they say you are." She looked at him, really looked, for maybe the 2nd or 3rd time since he arrived at this school. She had been careful about that. She had a theory that looking too directly at certain things created an obligation, and she had not been ready for the obligation. He looked back, not performing patience, not waiting for anything in return. Just there, the way things are there when they have decided to be. She picked up her bag. He walked out beside her, and neither of them said anything, and that was its own kind of conversation, the kind that doesn't need words because it is already saying everything the words would approximate. "Okay, I need you to pause for a second. Drop a comment right now and tell me, are you rooting for Olivia? Because she has spent 3 years building a wall that this boy is walking through one brick at a time, and it is everything. Comment below, and if you're not already subscribed, please do it now. This story is not done, and you need to be here for what comes next. The next morning, everyone had heard. Lumen International Academy processed information at the speed of shared phone screens, which in practice meant that by the time first period began, a version of what had happened in the cafeteria had reached every student who had been absent and several who had been present, and had already supplemented what they witnessed with what they imagined. In some versions, Theo had shouted, which was so contrary to his actual behavior that it said something specific about the gap between what had happened and what people needed to have happened. In none of the versions was Olivia the center of the story, which was perhaps the truest thing about all of them. Theo walked into homeroom and sat beside Olivia, not across from her, beside her. The room watched. He looked at the room the way you look at weather, registering its presence without particularly caring about its opinion of you. "Are you okay?" he asked her, quietly, like the room wasn't full of people actively deciding what this meant for the social order of the institution. "I think so," she said. Her eyes were clear. She had slept. She had also, before sleeping, taken the drawing out of her sketchbook and looked at it for a while, and then put it away in the same careful place. "Good," he said, "because I'm not done trying." She looked at him. Trying what? He was quiet for a beat, the kind of beat that means the answer is already there and is simply being given room to arrive. "To make you see me the way I see you." Olivia didn't have an answer for that. She looked at her notebook, then at him, then at her notebook. Something in her chest was doing something specific and inconvenient that she was going to think about later, privately, in the allocated time she had begun setting aside for things she couldn't process in real time. The teacher began the lesson. She drew a single careful line on the open page and thought about what he had said for the rest of the hour, which meant the drawing stayed a single line, which had not happened since she was learning. The days that followed had a different quality, like the air pressure had changed and hadn't changed back, a shift so gradual you couldn't point to the exact moment it happened, only to the fact that it had. They fell into rhythms without agreeing to them, the way habits form, not through decision, but through repetition that becomes expectation, that becomes the shape of a day. After art club on Tuesdays and Thursdays, he waited for her with 2 cans of warm coffee from the vending machine on the 3rd floor, the specific walk from the art room to which she had watched him memorize over the first week. 1 black for him, 1 with milk for her, which he had gotten right on the 2nd attempt and had never explained how, which she had noticed and not mentioned. On the days he had soccer practice that ran late, she stayed in the art room longer than she needed to, which she told herself was about the drawing and which was partially about the drawing. He found her there when practice was done. Neither of them had arranged this. Neither of them mentioned that they were doing it. They didn't name any of it. They were both, perhaps, afraid of what naming it would cost, afraid that putting words around something this specific would change its shape, the way labeling a particular quality of light sometimes diminishes it by turning it into a category. On weekends, they found a park near the school. It was not a famous park, not the kind that appeared on maps of Seoul's best attractions. It had a small arched bridge over a narrow stream and a scattering of trees that were mostly bare still in these early weeks, and benches where old men played paduk in the afternoons and children chased ducks on the stream bank. It was ordinary in every way except that it was theirs by default, by the accident of neither of them suggesting anywhere more interesting, by the fact that it was 10 minutes from the school and they had both started walking in its direction without fully discussing it. They went there with her sketchbook and his guitar. He was considerably better at guitar than he was at drawing. This was immediately clear and explained somewhat by the fact that he had been playing since he was 9, pushed toward it by a mother who had decided that American boys needed a discipline that wasn't sports, and had been right about both the discipline and the outcome. He played the way she drew, automatically, without apparent effort, as if stopping would require more work than continuing. She listened to him play and drew the bridge and then drew his hands on the strings, the specific way his left hand formed chords and his right moved across them, and then drew his face when his eyes were closed and the music was making him somewhere else entirely. That last drawing she didn't show him. She kept it in the inner pocket with the other things that mattered. The school watched. That was simply the nature of the place. It had always watched, and it watched harder now, and the whispers didn't stop. But something in their quality changed as the weeks went on, the cruelty going out of them and being replaced by something more complicated. The grudging acknowledgement that arrives in communities when something unexpected turns out to be real. Giselle kept her distance. The boys who had laughed at his lunch table the week after the cafeteria incident went quiet when he walked past them. Something had changed in the architecture of the place, and everyone inside it felt it and adjusted in the small, unspoken ways that social architectures adjust. One afternoon in the art room, the late light coming through the windows at the angle that made the chalk dust look golden and suspended, Theo put down his pencil and said, "Tell me something about yourself, something that isn't in your sketchbook." Olivia looked up. "Everything important is in my sketchbook. Then tell me something that isn't important." She thought about it. She liked this about him, that he asked for the specific thing rather than the general one, that when he wanted to know something he said exactly what it was, rather than making her guess at the question inside the question. "I can't sleep if there's any light in the room, even the standby light on the television. I have to cover it with a sock." He nodded. "I can't sleep if there's no sound. I have a fan on even in winter. My sister thinks it's a psychological disorder." "How many siblings do you have?" "Just her." She's 19 and at university in California, and she is extraordinarily opinionated about everything, which I mean as a compliment. He paused. Your turn. I'm from Lagos originally, she said. I moved here when I was 12. My mother took a research position at the university. Do you miss it? She thought about this for longer than she thought about most things. I miss specific things, the noise. Lagos is loud in a particular way that has layers to it, like music has layers. The color, the way the mornings smell there, which I've never been able to describe accurately to anyone who hasn't been. She paused. Here is beautiful, but it's a different kind of beautiful, quieter. He was quiet for a moment, in the way he was quiet when he was actually thinking rather than waiting. My father is Korean, my mother is American. I grew up in Los Angeles but came here when I was 15 for his work. I've never fully belonged to either place. She looked at him. Does that bother you? It used to. He picked up his pencil but didn't draw anything. Now I think it's just what I am. Two things at once, neither one cancelling the other out. He looked at the window. Both real. Olivia looked at him for one full second, a specific kind of full second look she reserved for things she was certain of. I understand that, she said. And that was the moment, though neither of them named it, though the art room continued around them with its smell of pigment and its late golden light, when the thing that had been slowly and quietly growing in the space between them made itself known. Two people who had each spent years occupying a space between worlds, finding in each other the specific recognition of someone who knows what that particular space feels like from the inside. Like the video right now, if this story is doing something to your heart, it takes 1 second and it helps so much. Thank you. Now let's keep going. The trouble came again on a Tuesday. Olivia was in the empty classroom after school, sitting by the window. She had her sketchbook open. She had been there for an hour. She had drawn nothing. The page in front of her was blank, and she was looking at it the way you look at something that is telling you something you already know but haven't admitted yet. She heard him before she saw him, the soft sound of a bag set down on a desk, the particular quality of unhurried movement that she had become without deciding to attune to. You didn't go home, Theo said. It wasn't a question, she answered it anyway. I was going to. He sat down nearby, not beside her, not across from her, but at the specific middle distance of someone who respects where the lines are. What's in the sketchbook today? She looked at the blank page. Nothing. He looked at it too. He saw what it was, the blankness of someone who hasn't been able to work, which for someone like Olivia meant something significant. He understood it without being told, which was one of the things about him she hadn't planned on and couldn't account for. They're saying things online now, she said. She had stopped looking at what they said about her. She had made that decision in November and held it. But the things they said about him were still reaching her. About why someone like him would keep coming back to her corner of the world. About what she must be doing. What she must have arranged. What advantage she was extracting. She pressed her palm flat on the blank page. Maybe they're right, she said, quietly, without drama, just a fact she was putting down on the table. Maybe you should stay away from me. He frowned. Why would I do that? Because I don't belong in your world, she said it evenly. You came here and in 2 weeks everyone wanted to know you. You could be anywhere in this school, with anyone. I'm just... Don't, he said. One word, not loud, but with enough weight behind it to stop the sentence. She looked at him. His eyes were different now. Not the gentle warmth she had catalogued over months of art rooms and park bridges. Something steadier, the kind of steadiness that is not stillness but decision. Olivia, I don't care about the world, I care about you. Those are not the same thing, and I need you to understand the difference. Her heart did something inarticulate and important. Before she could find a response, a flash of light from the doorway startled them both. They turned. The doorway was empty. Whoever had been there was gone, but a phone had been there, and Olivia understood in the way you understand certain things before you can articulate them, that this moment was about to leave this room and enter a much larger one. By the following morning it was everywhere. 2 students in an empty classroom, sitting nearby, doing nothing that required explanation, but the caption someone had written above it before posting it, Theo Kang's secret, who is the mystery girl, had turned her into a question about him, a side note, an appendix, which was its own specific kind of violence. Olivia walked into school with the settled quality of someone who has already done the worst of the processing before arriving and has decided not to spend the day performing distress for an audience. The hallways looked at her. She looked back. Theo fell into step beside her in the second corridor. He was holding 2 coffee cans, one black, one with milk, which he held out without looking at her, which was its own kind of statement about how normal he was choosing to make this. She took it. "People are staring," she said. "Let them." They walked into class together. From the back of the room, a voice, a boy named Juan, said something that was specifically designed to carry. Couldn't he find someone more his type? The words hit somewhere specific. She was already moving past them when Theo stopped walking. He turned. The room went quiet in the particular way rooms go quiet around him, not from fear, but from the specific quality of attention he produced when he was no longer being patient about something. "She's better than all of you put together," he said. "Not performed, not theatrical. Said the way you say something that you have believed for a long time and have simply decided is worth saying out loud now." Someone made a small involuntary sound. He turned back, reached out and took her hand. Not for the room, not to make a statement, because it was the honest thing to do in that moment, and he had long since stopped organizing his behavior around what the room would think of it. She looked down at their linked hands, then up at him. He wasn't looking at the room, he was looking at her. "Don't ever think you're not enough," he said quietly. "Do you understand me?" Olivia pressed her lips together, nodded. They sat down. The room began breathing again, and what it breathed out was different from what it had breathed in. The weeks that followed were the best weeks. Exams arrived and gave the school a collective excuse to turn inward, the specific social pause that descends when biology tests and math assessments demand priority over everything else. They studied in the library across from each other, their books spread between them, trading whispered questions about subjects one knew better than the other. She was stronger at languages and humanities. He surprised her at sciences, which she told him he did not seem like a sciences person. "What does a sciences person seem like?" he asked, looking at her over a chemistry textbook. "Someone who doesn't think about feelings." "Scientists think about feelings," he said. "We just try to understand the system around them first." That's exactly what someone who avoids feelings would say. He laughed, and the librarian looked up sharply, and they both went with unconvincing speed back to their respective textbooks. She was smiling at the page for several seconds before she stopped. On Saturdays they went to the park with the bridge. The cherry blossoms were coming now, first tentatively, a single tree here and there in the first pale bloom of it, and then all at once the way they always came, the world going suddenly and generously pink. She drew the park under the blossoms. He played guitar while she drew. On one of these afternoons, sitting on the grass with his guitar across his knees, he looked up and said he had been working on something. "The chord progression?" she asked. "No, something else. Something I've been working on since—" He paused, adjusting his fingers on the strings. "Since a while ago." He played. She knew the melody immediately, knew it before she consciously processed knowing it, the way you know certain things before you've named them. It was hers, the melody she hummed without knowing she was humming, when she was drawing or thinking, or somewhere between one thought and the next. She had been humming it for as long as she could remember, had never thought about where it came from, or what it was, had never considered that it was anything more than the sound her mind made when it was occupied. He had turned it into something. Given its structure beneath it, chords that held it up from underneath without changing what it was, made it sound like itself, but more fully itself than it had been alone. She set her pencil down. "You learned it," she said, and her voice came out a different size than she intended. He looked at her, smiled, not the social smile, not the quiet, warm one she had catalogued carefully over months, the smile of someone who has been working towards something for a long time and has finally arrived. "I've been practicing since October," he said. October, the month they first walked to the bus stop, the month the melody first reached him. "Why?" she asked. "Because it's yours," he said simply, "and I wanted you to hear what it sounds like when someone else loves it." She looked at him for a long time. The cherry blossoms moved in the wind. The melody had stopped, but it was still in the air. That specific quality music has of occupying a space longer than the sound does, of leaving something behind in the atmosphere. "Theo," she said, "yeah, I think you should know that I have been trying very hard not to fall in love with you." He put his hand over his mouth. She could see the laugh he was containing with some effort. Then, "How's that going?" "Not well," she said. He set the guitar in the grass with care and moved closer. Close in the specific way of two people who have been carefully maintaining a particular distance, and have finally, by mutual unspoken agreement, decided to close it. "I stopped trying not to fall in love with you around November," he said. "The day you said no without apologizing for it." She blinked. That's when. You said it like it was the most natural thing, and I thought, he stopped, looking for the sentence. I thought, I want to be someone who deserves a no like that. She looked at him, he looked back. The cherry blossoms fell. You're the only one, she said quietly, who never pretended. Everyone else wanted something from me, or wanted me to be less. She stopped. You just looked. I'm still looking, he said. And then, quietly, in the private corner of a park covered in falling pink, they stopped talking. The way conversations end when everything necessary has been said and what comes next doesn't have words. Hold on, I need you to take a breath with me for a second, because we're about to go somewhere this story did not warn you about. Before we get there, subscribe, like this video and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, because this community is growing and I want to know who's here. Okay, here we go. After that afternoon, things moved into a new shape. They still moved quietly through the school. This was Olivia's nature, and Theo had adopted it without being asked. The way you adopt things that make sense to you, without needing to explain why they make sense. They still sat in the art room, still went to the park on Saturdays. But the pretending was gone. The careful management of what this was and wasn't and what it might be and what they were willing to call it. Gone. She started leaving him small drawings tucked inside the sketchbook he occasionally borrowed. Not declarations. Small things she had seen during the day that had reminded her of him, or a single drawn sentence that said something she hadn't found the spoken words for yet. He kept all of them. She discovered this when the sketchbook fell open to a page she hadn't filled, where everyone was tucked with the care of things that matter. He started sending her things at random hours, not long messages, a photo of the Seoul sky from his apartment window at 11 at night, ink blue with a single lit window across the street. A voice memo of a chord he was trying to work out, rough and incomplete. Once, a recording of rain against his window because she had mentioned once that she found the sound calming. She listened to it 3 times. You sent me rain, she said the next morning. You said you liked it. I said it was calming. I didn't mean... She stopped. He was looking at her with that expression, the one that said he had meant to and would not be apologizing for it. Thank you, she finished. He handed her the coffee with milk. She took it. They were going to be okay, she thought. They were going to be more than okay. And then, on a Wednesday evening in March, her mother called her into the living room. We're going back to Lagos. Her mother's research position at the university was concluding. An opportunity had opened, the kind that you build a career on, the kind you do not pass over. A position at a university in Lagos for at least a year, possibly longer. The family would go together. That was how it had always been. Olivia sat with this for a long time. She thought about the park, the blossoms, the notes tucked in the sketchbook, the rain recording. She thought about what it had felt like to finally arrive somewhere with someone, and what it would cost to leave. She did not tell Theo. Days passed. She watched herself not tell him with the specific discomfort of someone who is aware of their own avoidance. She told herself she was waiting for the right moment, which was a more palatable way of saying she was afraid of what the right moment would require of her. He noticed he was someone who paid attention. What's wrong, he asked, on a Thursday in the art room. Nothing, she said. Then, something, but I'm not ready to say it. He nodded. Let her keep it. Didn't push. This was one of the things. She had a private list of things, kept in no sketchbook, just held, that she trusted about him. She nearly told him twice that week. Once on the walk to the bus stop, when the evening was warm and the city looked the way it looks on nights when bad news seems impossible. Once in the library, when he fell asleep mid-chapter, and she sat looking at his face for several minutes and thought that this was exactly the kind of thing you did not want to have to stop. She told him the night before graduation. They sat on the back steps of the main building. The city spread below them in lights, and she had been carrying this for 3 weeks, and it had become too heavy. I'm leaving after tomorrow, she said. He turned. What? After graduation, back to Lagos, my mother's position. She kept her voice level. It cost her something. At least a year. He went very still. Not the controlled stillness she had seen on the first day. This was the other kind, the stillness of someone for whom movement is not yet available. Why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't want it to be real yet, she said honestly, and because I didn't know what you would do with it, and I was afraid of what I would do with whatever you did. He was quiet. The city lights spread below them, music from a distant open window. He took one long breath and then looked at her with the soft, honest smile she had first seen in October and had never fully gotten used to. Then let's make tomorrow our best day, he said. Graduation was loud and pink and full of the specific bittersweet weight of a moment that is ending and beginning simultaneously. They stood together in their robes. Their friends found them. There was laughter and there were tears from the people around them, and everything had the quality of both arrival and departure. When the ceremony ended and the courtyard filled, Theo found her near the cherry blossom tree. He was holding something wrapped in paper, tied simply. She unwrapped it carefully. A sketchbook, dark cover, new. She opened it expecting blank pages. Every page was full. The park bridge in early winter, the trees bare, her from behind, pencil in hand, the particular hunch of her shoulders when she was absorbed, him at the guitar from her perspective, which meant he had asked someone to photograph him and then drawn from the photograph, which was exactly the kind of thing he would do, the school gate at night, which he had been paying attention to when she talked about it, their first walk to the bus stop, the light direction exactly right. On the last page, in the leftward-leaning handwriting she knew by now, everyone loved me for how I looked, but you loved me for who I was. When you draw again, I'm still somewhere in those pages. Olivia's eyes filled. She looked up at him. He was watching her with the open expression of someone who has offered something real and is ready for whatever comes next, regardless of what it is. "I'll write," she said. "I know. I'll come back." He smiled. "I know that too." She wanted to give him something equal to what he had given her. She was a person of images, and the right image wasn't available. So she did the thing she had learnt to do with him. She said the true thing, without decorating it. "You're the first person who ever made me feel like being exactly myself was enough." He looked at the sky for a moment, then back at her. His eyes were bright. "It was always enough, Olivia. It was more than enough. It was the whole thing." The bell rang for the last time. The courtyard cheered. Cherry blossoms fell because that was what they did. They fell when they were ready, without waiting for the right moment. They stood together under the tree while the world moved around them, holding the sketchbook between them like the thing it was. Not an ending, a comma. If you're crying right now, drop it in the comments. I see you, I'm here. But don't go anywhere yet, because this story has one more chapter, and I promise it's worth staying for. 5 years later, Seoul had changed the way all cities change. Not in their bones, but in their surface. New buildings where old ones had stood. New restaurants filling the gaps where other restaurants had been. The cherry blossom tree outside Lumen International Academy was the same, because cherry blossom trees do not negotiate with time, and memory pulls under them like light under water. Olivia stepped off the metro at 22 years old, sketchbook tucked under one arm, wearing the easy confidence of someone who has learnt to be at home in themselves, not because the world became kinder, but because she stopped waiting for it to authorize her. Lagos had given her things Seoul hadn't known she needed. Her grandmother's cooking, which she had documented in the 11th sketchbook in a series of detailed still life drawings that her grandmother found both flattering and bewildering. Her cousin's noise, which was the specific noise of people who love you enough to be loud around you. The particular quality of Lagos light, which she had tried to describe to Theo in text messages and eventually in a series of watercolor sketches she photographed and sent, which he had told her were the best things she had ever made, which was the kind of assessment she trusted from him precisely because he had no strategic reason to give it. She had sent a lot of things over 5 years. He had sent back, always without the long silences that opened between people separated by distance and time. There had been sparse stretches, exam periods, a difficult second year at music college that he had described only in fragments, the specific emotional vocabulary of someone working through something they don't yet fully understand, but it had always resumed. The thread had never broken. She was in Seoul for a graduate program in fine arts, 2 years, at the institute she had been working toward for 3 years in Lagos. She had not framed this as a return to anything specifically. She had framed it as going where she was going next, which happened to be a place she had been before. She had not told him when she was arriving. She was walking through the Yeonam-dong neighborhood on a Saturday afternoon, sketchbook open, looking at the specific way the late afternoon light hit the white-painted walls of a row of small art galleries. When she heard it, she stopped walking before she understood why. A melody. Soft. Familiar in the way that certain things are familiar before memory catches up to recognition. Before you know what it is, you know that it is yours. The kind of sound that finds you rather than the other way around. She turned. A small venue through an open door. A wooden stage, modest, lit from above. A crowd of maybe 40 people, quiet and attentive, and on the stage a man with warm brown hair that still brushed his forehead, guitar in his hands, eyes closed, playing the melody she had been humming all her life. Her melody, in his hands. 5 years later, and it was still there, still in his fingers, still its fully itself version that he had given it in the park under the blossoms. She stood in the doorway and forgot to move. He opened his eyes. She watched him find her in the crowd. The specific moment of it, the arrangement of his face shifting in the way she recognized before she could name it. The way you recognize things that have always been yours, even when you haven't seen them in years. The song didn't stop. He kept playing, but he was looking at her. She walked through the crowd slowly to the edge of the stage. He finished the song. The room applauded. He barely registered it. "You came back," he said. Slightly lower, slightly more settled, but still the same voice, gentle and unhurried, the voice of a sentence that has been taking its time. Olivia laughed, the laugh she had only ever laughed in this city, in this particular neighborhood of her life, the one that belonged to whatever this was. "I told you I would." He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a folded page, worn at the creases from being handled over years. She took it and unfolded it. Her own drawing, the one she had made at the park under the cherry blossoms, him playing guitar, eyes closed, the late afternoon light catching the side of his face the same way it was catching him now on this stage. She had given it to him the last day. She hadn't known he'd kept it. "I kept everything," he said. The song, every letter, every photograph, the voice note of rain from Lagos at 3 a.m. He paused. "I didn't know what to do with any of it except hold on to it." She looked at the drawing, at the stage, at him. "I filled 11 sketchbooks in 5 years, she said. "I know, you sent me photos. In every sketchbook," she said, "there are at least 3 drawings of you." Something moved through his expression, the same full, unhurried attention he had been giving her since she walked into a classroom and didn't look up. "I learnt something after you left," he said, "about what it means to be known." He paused. "You saw me when I didn't fully see myself, and I spent 5 years trying to become the person you saw." She looked at him for a long moment. "Theo, that person was already there. I just drew what I could see." He reached out and took her hand the same way he had taken it in the classroom 5 years ago. Not for the room, not as a statement, because it was true. "Then don't stop drawing," he said. She looked at their linked hands, then at him. "I'm going to be here for 2 years, she said. "I know," he said. "I'm going to be here significantly longer than that." She smiled, the kind that arrives without being decided, the kind that happens because the circumstances are right and she had finally, completely stopped fighting the circumstances. "Okay," she said. He lifted the guitar. "There's a park with a bridge 10 minutes from here. The cherry blossoms are about a week from peak." She held up her sketchbook. "Then let's go," she said. And they went, not back to where they started, but forward into something that had always known it would end up here. 2 people who had found each other in the noise and chosen the quiet, who had kept the thread across years and cities and the particular loneliness of growing up while the person you love is somewhere else, growing too. The city moved around them, indifferent and beautiful, entirely unbothered by theirs. But theirs was the one worth telling. If this story found you tonight, if something in it landed somewhere it wasn't supposed to, I need you to tell me which moment. Was it the art room? Was it the cafeteria floor? Was it the graduation sketchbook? Or was it her standing in the doorway of that venue, hearing her own melody in his hands? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. I'll pin the one that breaks me most, and this story has room for more. The 5 years in between, the late-night voice notes, the 6 weeks when communication went quiet, and what happened on either side of it. The first time she drew someone in Lagos who reminded her of him. The time he played the melody on a stage for the first time without telling the audience where it came from. Those stories are waiting. And Olivia has a best friend in Lagos who has been watching all of this from the outside and has a story of her own that nobody has told yet. And Sam, the boy who ate everyone's lunch at the popular table, grew up quietly into someone surprising. You decide which thread we pull next. Vote in the comments. I go wherever you send me. Subscribe if you haven't already. Turn on notifications. New story every week right here. I'll see you in the next one.